Would you like to create a small figure with your 3D pen? This video will take you from making an armature to a finished figure without this happening. For those of you who are new to 3D pens, here is a short explanation of what we are up against. The process starts with a solid material, which is softened by the pen to a consistency that you can draw with, sort of like a glue gun melting a glue stick. The lines solidify again in their new shape in about 15 to 20 seconds as they cool down. However, you can resoften them back up with adding more heat to strategic places. In this case, by adding small amounts of plastic to the solid line. The new plastic is hot, and it will transfer its heat to the old solid line and remelt it in just a few seconds at that exact spot, so you can reshape it as you wish. Which makes building this armature possible. But here's the deal. The heat transfer is your best ally until it becomes your worst enemy. Because sometimes it will collapse shapes you were planning to keep. What we need is a plan to guard against that. In the first two figure drawing videos, we made these two armatures. If you missed it, the links are in the description below. At the end of both of those videos, I checked the balance of the figures by popping them off the surface to make sure they are standing on their own. Like so. Good. Now we have to reattach it to the surface to proceed. If you are working on a plexiglass sprayed with acrylic sealer or hairspray, just a simple line on each end of the foot will reactivate the glue action on the surface and mount it securely back up. Now we are ready to put some flesh on those bones. Here are 10 tips how to go about it. Not that this is a complete list. It is helpful to start each figure with establishing the placement of the three biggest shapes: the rib cage, pelvis, and the head. For making figures, we'll need some curves, and curves in space are challenging. One way to create curve in space is to shape the plastic in those 15 seconds before it cools and solidifies. Notice that I'm holding my figure's hand the whole time I'm working on it. There is a good reason for this. We'll get to that in a minute. I use a knitting needle or tweezers to do this. It is somewhat challenging when you have to reproduce the exact symmetrical curve on the other side, so I use this sparingly. But there is no avoiding curves. Even if you start with the posable doll armature from the figure 1 video, which starts on a flat surface, you will still need to add the curve of the spine to your rib cage. Remember I told you to hold your guy's hand? Because if you don't, he will have a nervous breakdown. Don't panic. He's not ruined. Just prop him back up and he'll cool down and get over it. The reason I mention this is to avoid the natural instinct to add hot plastic directly to the armature along the long bones to make the limbs thicker. Sometimes you get away with it, but it doesn't make them a whole lot thicker, and sometimes this will happen. will need a different strategy than just adding the plastic on willy-nilly. The solution that comes to mind first is making an armature out of wire, like any sensible sculptor would do. I can add plastic along the long bones, but when I bridge from point A to point B, it's not sticking all that well, even though I applied masking tape to the whole thing because the plastic wouldn't stick to the plain wire at all. And the tape is frankly not providing a whole lot better hold. Perhaps I need to spray it with hairspray or cover it all in plastic before I try bridging. Also, it took over an hour to make it. Definitely a lot of trade-offs. So let's try working smarter rather than harder. If I bridge from the pelvis to the knee, I'm heating up only one single point along the leg, and not all of them. And that it can take. And then I go and work on the other side to give the first line time to cool. And repeat. After about 4 lines on each side, I have enough added volume for a decent sized thighs, without any meltdowns. Let's work on the arms. If anything gets loose, like this elbow, hold it for a few seconds. I was obviously not alternating my moves enough. But you will get a feel for what you can get away with. You don't have to keep every line you make, or not all of it. I want to add a shape here that looks something like this. I could make a pattern, make it on a solid surface and attach it, but I find it way easier to just kind of triangulate the calf shape by adding a temporary line connected to the surface. Now I have a point from which I can bridge back to the ankle. You may think I am doing a rather sloppy job of filling this shape, but that is entirely intentional. I am trying to be careful not to melt the shin bone. Just a few points of contact will not transfer as much heat as if I was filling it in neatly. Another way to make a curve is to build it up from a flat plane that is already somewhere on your project. If you work like a 3D printer, just piling lines on top of each other, you can get away with making about 6 of them before the whole thing starts to collapse and you have to wait for it to cool. But at this size of sculpture, 6 lines is significant distance. And starting from a solid surface, you can curve the pile going up as needed, creating a molded profile, and then work over that curved ridge. Now we need to bind it all together without melting anything we plan to keep. I bet you already know the answer. How to go about that? Yes, sloppy fill-in and switch places constantly to allow the new additions to cool while you are working somewhere else. At some point, I will have to take the figure off the surface to fill in the hard-to-reach places. And while I'm at it, I can add a few strategic curves with the work over the curved ridge method. As you can see, I am constantly switching all these methods and places where I apply them. And that is a tip number 7. Switch places often so you do not overheat any particular part too much. Here is a short time lapse that represents about 15 minutes of sculpting, so you get the sense of the timing of the workflow. Worked a bit too intensely on both feet at once and had to catch my guy a bit because he didn't like that. About the head. Even if the figure is a reasonable size, let's say 5 inches, the head will have to be rather small. And small things are hard. When we made our armature in the figure video, we used a wooden bead as a placeholder for the head. It is helpful to continue thinking of this size head as a bead. Beads have holes in them all the way through, which is super convenient for testing different heads on different bodies, holding heads while sculpting, and eventually in attaching them to the rest of the figure. I am making my bead channel with some super skinny knitting needles, but you can also use 2 pieces of any stiff wire. First, I make a profile-shaped pancake that accommodates the bead hole. And then I apply the curved ridge method to get to the width of the head in 2 installments. Instead of working over those big elephant ears, I will just fill the corners with solid plastic, because I need solid lump of material to be able to sculpt the features. And I don't want to hit any hollow spots doing it. The shape is so tiny it fills in just about 2 layers. Now we have a solid helmet-shaped lump of plastic to smooth, sand and sculpt into a face. which is the subject of the small heads video, and the link is down below. So we won't get into too much of a detail here. Sculpting the head is a matter of moving small amounts of plastic to just the right spot. And you can do the same thing with the whole body. Since you have to smooth it anyway, you might as well sculpt some shapes along the way. Sometimes I remove the arms temporarily to reach the sides of the figure better, but it depends on the gesture if you need to do it or not. At the moment, I prefer this particular smoothing tip, since it lets me work both with the flat and the rounded shape on the side of it, without having to switch tips. To prevent burn marks, clean your tip often on a piece of wood wrapped in several layers of paper towel. The needle tip I used for the head is also helpful here for doing the tight corners. It's a good idea to keep the figure lean, so there is room for whatever you plan to do with it next. Which, of course, really depends on your specific project. You can add more muscular anatomy as you smooth, or you can sculpt clothing instead, or armor, but you need to plan for that along the way for everything to fit together. Or perhaps it will be a mixed media art doll with fabric costume. Figure projects can vary a lot, so you do you. These 10 tips will help with any figure you might want to make, or fantasy creature, or Pokemon, or animals, or anything else for that matter. Here are 2 prior armature videos, and the one on sculpting small heads. Good luck with your figure making project. Until next time, go and make something.